You know him as the Pulitzer Prize winning author and journalist. He's an investigative journalist. He is the co-founder of DC Report. He is David K. Johnston, everybody.
Hey there. Good to see
Hi.
you.
Thank you for coming on this week. I know we don't have Mark, but boy, do we have a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on in the old Trump trial. Woo! They got a gag order today that was finally enforced. It's like, how many times do you have to break it before something gives? And now he's been fined $9,000, which for him probably isn't a lot, but at least we've got something going here.
Well, he got a warning from the judge about being incarcerated. Now, my expectation is that if Donald violates the gag order, but not in the most serious way, he doesn't threaten a juror or witness, he simply mentions them, which he's prohibited from doing, that the judge will hold him in contempt, but he probably won't jail him until after the jury comes in. I think he's unlikely to do it during the trial. It is possible, if Donald does something like that the jurors are going to spend the next estimated 5 weeks of the trial living in a hotel. We already have the jurors gathering at a spot not at the courthouse, location undisclosed, and being then brought there in police vans. And that's what you do in mob trials. Mm-hmm. In this case, they're not worried about Donald. They're worried about Donald's more fanatical supporters. But outside the courtroom, in the street outside where Donald said, they had to shut down all the traffic. Cars are going by every day. I was in New York last week. We saw cars go by the courthouse. There's a couple of demonstrators who show up, just a handful. The bloodbath he promised, the people rising up, it's just not happening because, of course, the one time people really did that, more than 1,000 of them so far have been sent. Many of those to prison.
I feel like I should introduce you to Hal. Hal, David.
Hello, Hal.
David, pleasure to be here. Thanks for being a part of the show.
So I would assume they're dragging people to court in the vans because of the danger of safety of being a juror at the Trump trial.
Right. And again, not from Donald, but from fanatics among his supporters. Right. A lot of people now who are getting police protection, which generally means that detectives, not blue suits, but detectives, pick you up at your home, drive you to the courthouse, and take you back. Now, that's true of some people in Jack Smith's team at the federal level. It's true of the daughter of the judge in this case, who Donald has gone after. And, I've been covering trials for about 55 years now, 56 years. I can't recall a single case ever where a defendant attacked the family of a judge. And the few cases where I've seen a defendant lash out at a judge were like, once they were found guilty or they were taken into custody and basically just screaming and yelling and being a child. This is extraordinary. I mean, mob bosses, mafia guys, they do not go around, threatening the family of the judge. And I'm surprised that Donald wasn't arrested for this a long time ago, but, we shouldn't be surprised about all the special treatment he gets anymore.
We were talking earlier. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just had a question for you, David. It already seems he's doing light jury tampering in as much as complaining about the political ideologies, like, it's an all Democrat jury. And how close is that to being an infraction?
Well, first of all, he doesn't know that they're all Democrats. I mean, there are, I think it was 85,000 people in Manhattan who voted for him. So he lost overwhelmingly both times, but he didn't get 0 votes in Manhattan. And he lost his own, by the way, voting precinct at Trump Tower in 2016. That's in the eye of the judge. We did have 2 people quit the jury, apparently, because of their concerns. One said, well, I couldn't be fair to him. But clearly they were motivated in part from their comments by some concern about their safety and well-being. It was also, by the way, look how quickly they seated a jury. Yeah. It had been expected to take 2 or 3 weeks, and they called a huge panel of prospective jurors, over 1,000 people, and they got a jury very quickly. And there are 6 alternates. Normally you have 12 jurors and 2 alternates. There are 6 alternates. If in deliberation somebody makes clear that they lied in voir dire, the process for deciding if you're fit to serve on a jury, and everybody is agreed on a verdict of either guilty or innocent, and one person is holding out, the judge can replace that person. They would call them into chambers, they would interview the person, and then they would assign one of the alternates and instruct the jurors to start anew with their deliberations. So
we were talking earlier about what constitutes a violation of the gag order. Is it, standing up on the courthouse steps and yip, yip, yip? Or is it reposting things on Truth Social, which is, according to the hearing last week, the judge is like, no, it's not. Reposting is not a passive act. It's an active act. You actually have to click buttons to make it happen.
Not only that, but Donald changed the quote from Jesse Waters.
Oh.
He put up his own quote. Those were not the words Jesse Waters spoke. They were similar, but Donald enhanced them. The fundamental part of the order is you may not speak about jurors, witnesses, court staff. You can attack the judge all you want. The judge, you want to go out and attack me, go right ahead. But his family is off grounds, and the jurors and witnesses are off limits. And the operative word is mention. He may not refer to them. But, as I said, I don't think he's going to end up, no matter almost anything he does to the jury, being jailed until the end of the trial. No reason the judge can't hold him in contempt once the jury goes into deliberations, he could take him into custody when the jury's out of the room. But he's not going to do it when the jurors might be influenced by that decision, because some state judge at a higher level might consider that reversible error. And Judge Marchand clearly runs a very tight ship. He's no Lance Ito, who lets the lawyers on one side run with the case. So I don't think you're going to see that. So what else you want to talk about today?
Let's talk about who's on the stand right now. It is Keith Davidson, who apparently is talking about how he told the National Enquirer editor about this blockbuster Trump story and then negotiated to sell it. So it looks like the prosecution is laying this groundwork and this foundation of their case, and we still don't know who's on the witness for the defense at all. But it seems hard to think about how they're going to refute any of this.
Well, the prosecution here has been very, very smart. They started off, first of all, with David Pecker, CEO and 10% owner of the company that owned the National Enquirer. Mm-hmm. He is not charged with anything. He doesn't appear to be at risk of being charged. He has a federal immunity agreement, but the state's clearly not going to prosecute him as long as he tells the truth.
Right.
And he is an independent corroborating witness to all of this. And he gets up and says, Donald's my friend. I still consider him my friend. Yeah, lots of luck getting Donald to take your phone call after this. But we have a piece of DC Report right now that is actually something new about Trump, something nobody has heard that I really would encourage people to go to. It's how Trump acts with news organizations.
Yeah.
And it's a very smart analysis by 2 scholars of this, and it has lots of new insights. So I really would encourage people to go to DC Report and read this piece, which went up earlier today. And it talks about how, Trump has a long history here of manipulating the news. When he was president, he revoked the press credentials of almost everybody who covers the White House. And they set up these ridiculous rules. You have to be there 90 of the last 180 days at the White House to keep your what's called a hard pass. Mm-hmm. The Washington Post has 6 reporters covering the White House. They're not all there every day. They're covering the White House, but in the same way that I've covered Washington for 50 years without ever living there. A lot easier today, by the way, than it was back before the internet. And Trump has, he often threatened to sue people. I mean, he called me at home many times and told me, I'm going to sue you into poverty and your children are going to be out in the streets. I go, Donald, if you have a case, then you should bring your case. Which would make him, of course, even angrier because he knew he didn't have anything. So this piece that we have is, I just think it will offer people new insights and a better, deeper understanding of what's going on with Donald.
Yeah, I was reading it. It's really, really interesting. dcreport.org is where you can find it. Let's move to the plan of the Biden campaign. I guess what they're trying to do is have President Biden kind of score some political points by, I don't know, they say mocking Trump, but kind of making jokes at his expense, a little zinger here and there. And up until now, they've kind of had other people doing that on his behalf, but maybe it's time for him to go for it.
Yeah, and Kim, I don't know how old your kids are, but if you don't have a sense of humor about yourself, about your kids, you will have a very tough time interacting with them.
Yes.
My 8 children, who all grew up to be surprisingly very different people, they did lots of things where, you had to laugh at yourself and laugh at the situation. Donald has no capacity to laugh at himself.
No,
so
as evidence is he can't even show up for the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Right. He not only didn't show up because that's where you roast the president. The president's speechwriters write a funny speech. When Obama was president in the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner, by the way, just to be clear, an event I would just never go to. Not me. We didn't know at the time that he had been in and out of the Situation Room because they were planning to go after Osama bin Laden. And it happened the very next night. They held off one night for reasons that haven't been disclosed, but Obama said no and wanted something more before they went into Pakistan to get him. And he says, as Donald Trump sitting in the audience, I'm glad I don't have to weigh the momentous decisions that are weighing down Donald Trump, like, should I fire Meatloaf? And the video of that scene, which you can find on the internet, on YouTube, everybody in the room is laughing up hilariously. And Donald is looking with this mean face, because he doesn't have any interior ability. Donald is an empty vessel inside that he tries to stuff with his claims of money, his nonsense claims of being Don Juan, and food. By the way, I don't know if you've noticed, but if you look closely, I think he's gaining weight. And Donald we're almost the same age, but he's 3 inches taller than me, and he claims to weigh 50 pounds less than me. And like, yeah, right, brother. And I've got a 32-inch waist.
Yeah, and he seems to be lacking in just so many things that make us all human. No love of any kind of music, never had any pets. He just seems to be an inhumane individual who is solely trying to feed his narcissism.
That's a really, really good description of him. He's not unlike the governor of North Dakota, who just has doubled down on something in her forthcoming book. She had a dog she didn't train. If your dog isn't trained, that's not the fault of the dog, that's you. And so she took the dog to a gravel pit and shot it. And the one thing I've seen about that I think is spot on is whatever editor worked on that book and decided to leave that in hates her. Because anybody who isn't an automaton, who isn't a Kristi Noem or a Donald Trump, understands that this isn't just awful. This is despicable and beyond belief. It's the kind of thing where, we often find with people who are torturers and serial killers that they started out torturing animals.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That's what she did. She punished the dog for her failure. Donald is like that. And no, the only time Donald ever had a dog around was when his first wife, Ivana, insisted that the dog was coming into the marriage. And another dog after that. Donald makes the character on the BBC, Doc Martin, who can't stand dogs, seem like a reasonable human being about this. But there is no you there, Hal. You're an object, and you either are to be used or you need to be blunted or pushed aside. There's no person there. And this applies to everyone. This is a man whose 3 marriages are all commercial transactions. Certainly the first and third. The second one, I think Marla actually loved him, but he regarded her as low class. I'm surprised he actually married her. But his marriages, they're not what any of the rest of us think of marriage as. This is not unusual. There are very wealthy people who have commercial transactions. You see some guy my age with some unbelievably gorgeous, could have walked off the pages of either Vogue or Playboy, 25-year-old. I assure you that's not a romantic relationship. That's a commercial transaction.
There they are.
Yeah.
And there's all the wives.
Wives. And remember, he mistook E. Jean Carroll for his ex-wife.
Crazy.
I mean, it's a lot of things you can mistake in your life, but mistaking the mother of your 3 oldest children, mistaking someone else for her tells you he doesn't really see and connect with people. He is very good at figuring out people's weaknesses and hiring people who have some flaw in their character or their emotional makeup that allows him to exploit and control them by paying them more money than anybody in the market would.
And now that sounds like something he probably learned at the foot of Roy Cohen back in the day, right?
Well, he learned it first and foremost from his father. I mean, one of my favorite stories about Trump growing up is there's a boy who I wrote about in my last Trump book, Johnny Messer, who's now in his 60s or 70s. Johnny lived a couple doors down the street. And one day when he was 6, 7, 8 years old, he's riding his bicycle on the sidewalk in Queens. And as he's going past the Trump house, which wasn't that fancy, frankly, especially compared to Dad's riches, he dropped a quarter out of his pocket. And he realizes it, and he turns around to go back on his bike. And Fred Trump has just pulled in his Cadillac and parked it. And he walks out to the sidewalk, picks up the quarter, holds it up in front of the kid and says, "Well, this is mine now." Who does that to a little child? Well,
Ebenezer Scrooge.
The man who created Donald Trump does that. In the Trump family, all that mattered was you won. And win means you got the money and you didn't get arrested. And beyond that, it just didn't matter. It is this horrible, perverse view. And so, Donald is his money. He's nothing else but his money. And down the road, we know what's going to happen to Donald. I used to say I have 1,000 batting average on my predictions, and one was he might file strategic bankruptcy to delay some of the proceedings involving the civil judgments. But he came up with the bond, so he didn't have to do that. So I've said, okay, my score is 999. I'm batting 999. He will file bankruptcy eventually, and I'll amend my score with a little asterisk. Donald is just, he's utterly predictable. And by the way, if you watch carefully when he comes out of court at the end of the day and speaks to the cameras, they're not getting as much coverage as he did, but he has gone off into the weeds in at least one of these post-courtroom talks. Donald is an extraordinarily good communicator. He knows how to take the complex issues in the books that are behind me on the shelf, my economics books, which I know he used they were in his 2016 platform, some of the points in them. And he took these complex ideas and reduced them to a phrase. And he knows how to communicate in a visceral, resonating way. A couple times now recently, he's just been, like Hillary Clinton, off into the weeds and the footnotes. And I think that's an indication of the stress he's under, of his long-term abuse of various kinds of pharmaceuticals. And mostly the stress. I mean, he knows where this road goes, and there's nothing he can do to stop it unless he flees the country, which is not beyond possibility.
Do us all a favor, Donald. Flee.
You were talking about the transactional nature of his relationships, and Linda in the chat said Karen McDougal says during her first date with him, he tried to pay her, and that's the only kind of relationship he's had with women, and she's going to likely be taking the stand in this trial as well.
You know what Donald will say about that? Well, that's what all men do. We all do that. It's just locker room. It's absurd. But that's who Donald is. And understand, Donald's relationship to money is not like that of most people. As a con artist, Donald would just go from one victim to another. When I first started covering Donald, 36 years ago, I guess, come next month, 35 years ago next month, I read The Art of the Deal, and I had read reviews of it, and they were not particularly praising reviews in any way, but not one reviewer recognized that what his book consisted of was describing one con game, one deception after another. In my either my 2016 biography of Trump or my 1992 book about the gambling industry in Trump, there's a chapter I call The Art of Deception. And to Donald, money is like water when you wash your hands, running through your hands. You know, okay, well, I got all this and spent it, and now I got to do another deal to make money. And so he would assume he would pay for sex with her. It's just his assumption. It also tells you what a terrible opinion of himself.
Absolutely. That
what a horrible self-opinion that you assume you're not attractive, you got to pay somebody.
Nobody would want to be with you unless you cough up the cash. Absolutely.
The unfortunate part of that is there's a lot of truth in that. I've interviewed women who asked out or took out when he was a young man. And when Donald was a young man, you know, most of us when we're 22 are pretty good looking. And he was tall and he wasn't overweight. And women found him to be so icky and yucky, he had to go find a hard drinking runway model. I mean, for those who don't know, that's like the very bottom of the pile for models. Department store runway model in Montreal. Nobody would marry him. Nobody would, you know, a lot of women like, what am I doing on this date? There's a famous actress I called and asked her about her date with Donald. And of course, I want to know, well, did you have breakfast together, right? And when I got to the crucial question, she said, the date ended early. Yeah. It ended early. And
sounds like she has good taste.
Her voice just was full of, what a creep. I can't believe I agreed to go out with this guy. Yeah. And that was basically what a lot of women I've interviewed over the years told me the same thing. They all found him creepy.
And a number of people in the chat are trumpeting the point that he's a bad father. And I had heard a story, and I would love to hear your opinion, because he brings that it's all about image, that kind of narcissism to the rest of his family. I heard a story that he went to pick up Don Jr. to go to a Yankee game when Don Jr. was in college. Don Jr. was wearing a Yankee jersey, and Donald slapped him in the face and told him to go put on a suit because that's what we wear.
That's right. Yeah. And that's just sort of very classic about Donald. His values and things are driven by his father. His father, who was very, very wealthy and had enormous cash flow, would come home in his suit. He would have dinner with his family. I'll give him credit for that. Mm-hmm. But then he'd immediately go back to work. He'd sit in the living room, pick up the phone, or he'd have documents to go through in his briefcase. I mean, he was a very, very hardworking guy. And he wanted Donald to be president. He wanted Donald, once his older son just wasn't up to what Dad wanted him to be, he became an alcoholic. He was a TWA pilot, became an alcoholic. He died in his 40s. Donald realized there was an opportunity to be the number one son. And he went for it. And whatever it took, that's what he was going to do. And we're all paying the price for this. So
there's a saying that any publicity is good publicity, right? Yeah, it doesn't matter whether it's bad or not. And I was reading this analysis about actually not in this case, that maybe because it seemed for a while like, oh, we're still talking about Trump. He's still in the news. He's still on the courthouse steps campaigning and doing all these things. But maybe these legal problems aren't such a good thing for him. Maybe this press isn't helping.
No, I don't think it is. And, you know, I probably read the same piece you did. I just don't remember where, because I subscribe and take so many news service things.
Yeah.
But I don't think this is helping him at all. And I said a long time ago that the trial would not help him. The diehard Trump people, whatever happens, you know, he's their guy. You know, there are these heroic pictures of him as if he's, you know, a muscled up Kirk Douglas in Spartacus. And there are all sorts of websites about how he is God's chosen agent, and just nonsense from, you know, as Donald likes to say, he loves the poorly educated, if not poorly educated, the poor thinking group. But people who are independents or who are marginally connected to Donald, they don't like Joe Biden, so they voted for Donald 4 years ago. This is not attracting them at all. And there are more embarrassing details that are going to come out. Assuming Stormy Daniels is called to testify, he's going to have to sit there and endure, I suspect, we don't know what questions will be asked, but we can guess, some rather humiliating questions and observations. There's a picture, I don't know if you've seen it, I think it was photoshopped, of Stormy Daniels in a dress with with mushrooms. And yeah.
I know what you're alluding to.
Yes, and I think I mentioned on the show when Mark was on one day that I had calculated that based on Stormy Daniels' book, he was paying her for sex at the rate of, or at least secrecy about the sex, the rate of $8 million an hour. I forgot about that he had to gross up the money, and he actually paid not $130,000 but $420,000, more than 3 times as much. So now we're talking about a phenomenal rate, something like $25 million an hour.
Crazy.
Vicky in Sausalito is asking mushrooms ? Let's just say Donald's privacy area and mushrooms. Go ahead and do the math, Vicky.
Yeah.
That's what we allude to. And David, I was wondering, so Michael Cohen, obviously, he's got a lot of, he holds a smoking gun. He knows so much the inner workings, but he's been posting on TikTok and, talking about the trial, as far as I hear, a little more than you might want a star witness to do. Yeah. Is that something that could possibly have negative ramifications?
Well, the defense will absolutely go after him about whatever he's put on TikTok. The problem the defense has when they put Michael Cohen on the stand is, first of all, prosecutors use criminals, including, hitmen, to go after other people. And in my dealings with Michael Cohen, by the way, everything he said has held up. He's been scrupulously honest. So Michael Cohen has a job. He's a graduate of just about the worst law school in America. And he graduated near the bottom of his class, but he did manage to pass the bar. And he is Donald's attack dog. And his job is to threaten people, intimidate people, especially news people, so that stories Donald doesn't want don't get out there. Once Donald turns on him, and it was Donald Trump's Justice Department that prosecuted Michael Cohen. Donald was the unindicted co-conspirator in that case, individual one. Cohen realized what had happened to him, and he flipped. Well, there are a few people more dangerous to you than an articulate person who recognizes that they have to be scrupulously honest going forward. And so I don't think the jury will have a hard time, given especially how good the prosecutors are so far in this trial, establishing that Michael Cohen's to be related. And he went to jail for the same fundamental crime. I mean, he was charged with a different offense, but it's the same events. That's going to hurt. And if the judge allows it, they point out that Donald Trump's Bureau of Prisons put him back in jail over a book he was writing. An absolute, unquestioned First Amendment violation. If they get that in front of the jury, that would be devastating to any attack on Michael Cohen. But Cohen can get up there and say, hey, I went to jail for Donald Trump.
Yep. As,
by the way, right now, his chief finance guy, Alan Weiselberg. Alan is in Rikers Island right now for 150 days. That's a place you don't want to be in one night.
No.
Oh, yeah. My grandfather was a prison guard at Rikers Island way back when.
Oh.
On the other side of the bars.
Oh, no.
Every time I've been in a prison or a jail and they close that Sally Port, very uncomfortable. I just...
Can we talk about the fake electors? Because there's a couple stories, and I know our time is almost over with you, but there's there's 2 stories. One, Michigan Attorney General now executing these search warrants on Google and X, trying to find more information about the fake electors in 2020. So they're still looking for information on this case. And then there's a story out of Arizona where one of the alleged fake electors is tapped to be the state party GOP chairman. So how much do people care about fake electors? Because when I think about it, David K. Johnston, I'm outraged that people try to tamper with American democracy, get in the way of what makes this country this country. Like, these are people that we should be ostracizing, and instead it seems like no one cares.
Kim, I don't know that no one cares. I mean, we know that no one in the leadership of the Republican Party in Arizona cares. That they took a person who was expelled from the state house and the fellow under indictment and made them national committee members of the Republican Party. Certainly will please Donald Trump, but will trouble people. But you've hit upon, frankly, the most important change I've seen in terms of news and the behavior of politicians. In the 60s and 70s and 80s, if I wrote a piece, saying you did this bad thing, the Michigan Secretary of State, who wanted to become a U.S. Senator, had found a way to create a slush fund with public money and use it to dole out to those local county clerks who were friendly and helpful to him and not to others. It ended his career.
Yes.
It was the end of his career. That's how he got Don right.
As well it should. Goes against what this country stands for, right? Right.
But politicians no longer, in general, are afraid of news organizations. The 50-year campaign by the far right to discredit honest news and get people to believe dishonest news. That is, don't trust the New York Times. They have actual reporters check their facts. Trust Breitbart and One Newsmax and One America or whatever it's called.
Gross.
It's had an enormous amount of success, partly because honest news organizations should annoy you. You pick up the paper and I don't want. And these organizations have learned how to stroke you, not to annoy you. And that's much easier to sell. And if people believe that they can live in a world where they only have to hear the news they want to hear, then that works. And we do have these silos. I mean, we all know people who only will listen to Fox or its ilk, like it. And it doesn't matter if it's been shown that they did something completely untrue, that you just block that out. Democracy doesn't work well in that kind of an environment. I don't think that's the majority of the American people. I think there are a lot of people troubled by this, but I also keep in the forefront of my mind that 54% of Americans read at the level of a sixth grader or less, 22% a third grader or less. If you can't read it above the sixth grade level, you don't have critical thinking skills. You cannot interpret and understand things, even if you were the smartest kid in sixth grade. It's just you don't have the capacity to do that. We'll see what happens. Arizona is a state that has elected some Democrats in recent years. It's not the Barry Goldwater Libertarians Republican state it was. It's a state that went for FDR in 1932. I mean, things change, populations change. But I think what happens in Arizona is going to depend on how much coverage this gets on TV and in the big papers in Phoenix and Tucson, and how adroitly the Republicans who don't like Trump and the Democrats exploit this to show a disregard. And by the way, there's a common theme in Donald's treatment of everybody, Governor Noem's shooting of her dog, what the Republican Party just did in Arizona. It is a disregard. You don't like the way we do or see things or what I want personally? Tough luck. Disregard should become a part of our debate. And we'll see. We'll see if how this campaign goes.
I look at it as a party that hasn't gotten the message, that they're still trying to put these people into positions of power that allegedly served as fake electors or have done these things or have been party to this, trying to take down our democracy. They still are doing this. And so it seems to me that it shows they haven't fixed anything. They aren't taking this seriously. And the party is as gross and as dirty as Trump himself.
Yeah. Timothy Snyder, the professor at Yale, whose specialty is authoritarian governments and how they come about, and written several brilliant, very short little books that are very focused. He points out that one of the fundamental elements of fascism is that the leader is outside of the rules. The leader is encouraged to break the rules, violate the rules, to operate in ways that hold everybody else in contempt. Well, I don't know what better describes that than both Donald Trump and the killing of the dog by Governor Noem. And I assume that's how you pronounce the name. To me, it's what my wife calls a red word. The fundamental element of establishing a tyrannical government has to do with following a leader who you admire because they hold the rules in contempt. And it's in the long run illogical. I understand the short-term emotional resonance. Get the guy.
Yeah.
But in the long run, it's contrary to your own interests. So, as you know, if you want to understand the mindset, by the way, there's a dark comedy to watch called "The Death of Stalin." And the minute Stalin dies, everyone around Stalin, Khrushchev and the others, all suddenly realize that they're in danger. And the rest of the movie is about that danger. And
I love that film.
Yeah, it is a dark comedy, but it is in some levels hilarious. And the only way you can tell that story, you got up on the screen that great cover for it. The only way that you can tell that story effectively, I think, is through comedy. And the most effective way to get at Donald is by mocking him, by doing what Biden is starting to do. So far, I would argue that Joe Biden's own communications people, have been among his worst enemies. Yeah. They have locked him away. He won't give interviews to serious journalists like the New York Times and the Washington Post who are going to ask tough questions. I posted a thing today in a journalism forum that, I almost long for the days of the Reagan administration, because you'd call the White House and the Reagan administration with some question that they wish you hadn't ever thought of, and they're off. But they understood back then. You are in the White House. You have a duty to answer this question.
That's right.
And they might sneer and they might tell you what a horrible person you are, but they'd answer the questions. Mm-hmm. This White House, there's a document I want from this White House. It's a document that would make Joe Biden, I believe, I don't have the document, but I believe it will make him look very good and Donald Trump look very bad. It's a public record. I think there's no question it's a public record. So I said, I want a copy of this. And they won't provide a copy of it. They won't even give an answer that indicates they understand the question. They give a very artful answer that ignores the question. And the reason is, I suspect, they think that if I have this document, there'll be a backlash they don't want to have, even though Joe Biden did the right thing and Donald did the wrong thing about something.
Sure.
And, they're prejudging what's going to happen instead of saying, oh, we wish you hadn't asked the question. Sure, here's the document. The Reagan people would have done that. I once on a football field had very strong, loud words with the Attorney General of the United States, Edwin Meese. But we stood there toe to toe when I was at the LA Times, and he answered the questions. That's not how this administration. It's been getting worse ever since George H.W. Bush was pretty good, but starting with Bill Clinton, it's just been a steady deterioration since then. And a lot of this is the fault of the Washington press corps and the way they do business. That's the reason I've never been willing to live in Washington. Jack Nelson very much wanted me to come to the Washington Bureau of the LA Times, and I wouldn't do it because if you go to Washington, you have to play the Washington game. There is just no way out of it. And so, by the way, a lot of reporters in Washington detest me because I'm in Rochester, New York, and I break stories that, of course, were right in front of their noses, but that are outside the way the Washington game is played.
So how are you going to get that document? You're going to file a Records Act
request? I have to decide whether I'm willing to hire lawyers. I figure it'll cost $25,000.
Oh, gosh. No.
But it will come out at some point. It may be after Biden leaves. That document will end up in the National Archives at some point, and it's not a document they can claim any security about.
Yeah.
There's no national security interest about it. We'll see. Maybe they'll come to their senses. Maybe somebody will slip me a copy of it. I don't know. It's more than one page. A document doesn't mean a page, but it's clearly a public record.
David K. Johnston, thank you for being on the Mark Thompson Show. Without Mark Thompson, you're awesome. We love you. And I can't wait to see you again next week.
Well, I hope to be with you next week. I'm on jury duty.
Oh.
I expect, because I teach law and I'm an investigative reporter, that I will get bounced as soon as I get in the jury box. But, you don't know.
No.
So who knows? I may be tied up, but I'll make sure you know ahead of time.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
What a pleasure. Thank you, David.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.